I would like to thank the organizers to invite the speakers to this panel. A quick introduction. My name is Primož Novak, and me and my co-founder of Economios. This is a legal advisory company. We've been advising an ICO in Switzerland. I think you met Luca here on the stage before from Hedge Crypto Project. And we're also advising legally an ICO in Slovenia. And here are two lawyers from the Economy. Economy was the first successful ICO in Slovenia. So this is Žiga Perović and Janez Kraucer. Well, so let me begin this discussion. As we all know, ICOs are not specifically regulated in the European area, in EU and in Switzerland. But the authorities are trying to, how should I put it, to combat some terrorist and anti-money laundering regulations, and also they're trying to fit tokens as a security. Those two are the biggest legal questions that are going on now. So I would like to give this topic to Matic here to talk about securities and how they correlate with tokens.
Thank you. So, as Primož mentioned, there is no clear guidance regarding the legal status of the ICOs around the globe. Basically, some regulators have issued some their legal views as how some specifics of ICOs should be regulated, but mainly the core of cryptocurrencies and all this market is not specifically regulated. There are some exceptions. For instance, in EU, the anti-money laundering directive explicitly mentions the virtual currencies, which means that this field is all applicable to cryptocurrencies. But given the fact that when you are conducting or exercising ICOs, you are gaining basically your fundraising or crowd selling. You're gaining a lot of assets. So this is an issue. It's an issue for potential investors, and it's an issue for potential ICO managers. So basically, three different approaches were taken around the globe. Some countries that banned the ICOs, for instance, China and South Korea, as we know, and some countries that seemingly welcomed ICOs. These are mainly offshore countries, which are tax favorable. But the main core of all of the market is EU and US, and mainly those countries issued some sort of warnings to issuers and investors to which how these ICOs should be treated legally. So they expressed their legal view that some cryptocurrencies could be viewed as financial instrument or security based on their existing legal legislation.
Okay, so let me ask you, what would it mean if a token would be considered as a security?
If a token...
Traps.
Yes, this implies several consequences. Mainly, there are if a token is considered as a financial instrument, this means that the issuer should publish prospectus which provide detailed information regarding the token. Basically, all of the obligations, if you would perform an IPO, therefore an initial public offering, therefore, there are the same obligations, and they would also have to acquire several licenses. They would have to be registered in specific legal form, and all of this.
Yes. Well, I think a big issue is that the technology is always a step ahead to the regulation. And the real question is, should blockchain technology and ICOs be regulated under the old regulations, or should the European Union on this market or several countries try to change the regulation in favor of ICOs, well, in favor, but in correlation. And for now, it seems that most countries just want to apply anti-money laundering to the ICOs. So I would ask Mr. Yanis his view on the anti-money laundering in the European Union and maybe in Slovenia.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the question. Just to go back to securities and regulating the ICOs. The thing is that we were talking before amongst ourselves, and we kind of agree that we need an ICO regulation, but the thing is that regulating ICOs by the old means, meaning the directives that are enforced now, the laws that are in each member state, regulating ICOs that way would just stifle innovation. We have to know that every ICO has a great idea backing the ICO itself, well, mostly or mainly. The thing is that regulating the ICO should be made in a way that also the lawmakers make an innovative approach to making the law. So what we are seeing now in some other member states, because this is a legal void concerning the directives of the EU, I would say that it is on each member state, or the ones that are courageous enough to do this, to prepare a special ICO laws that would enable in some way the ICOs to be carried out, but in the other way, for sure, to enable them to be carried out in a legal way. So what we are seeing now is, or what would be the best in my opinion, would be a principle-based legislation that would be monitoring all the ICOs and what they do and how they do it, and then the regulators should fill this void with more detailed laws. So for the first thing, it would be best to see what principles we should use, and then make these principles into a law, and then fill them with more detailed legal provisions. To go back to my question would be AML. So the current AML directive in the EU doesn't really know the the digital assets, or doesn't regulate them. We have a law that implements this directive in Slovenia, and this law actually knows digital assets in some way. The wallets, wallet providers, and some other subjects have to oblige by this AML law here in Slovenia. This is very important actually, because if you have an ICO and you don't do your KYC checks and your AML checks, or your AML policy is insufficient, that means a lot of problem in the future when you will be burning through these assets that you collected during the ICO, because you don't know where they came from, who was the investor in your ICO, and that is a big risk, not just legal-wise, but also otherwise, for the companies that go through an ICO. So good AML policy that would in some way mimic the current directive here in Europe, and a good KYC process would be best for each and every ICO to be carried out. Doing an ICO without a KYC or the AML brings a lot of risks for now.
Yes, and we also can agree that each member state of the European Union has its own anti-money laundering policy, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same
Well, basically it's covered by the directive and then it's implemented into each state's law. So the new, the revision of the AML directive that is being prepared also has some digital assets mentioned, and they will be covered by the new AML directive. But it's a question when this will come in force, and it's a question how these directives will be implemented in each and every member state. So this is a thing for every member state to take into consideration and make the AML friendly for even the ICOs or the companies that are working with digital assets. So yeah, it's a thing that needs to be solved on the regulatory side, and also with all the ICOs, they should do their best to implement such policies that would enable them to do a good AML checks and tests and all that that's needed.
So you think that the current AML regulations is friendly, or is it a good environment for ICOs in the European Union?
Well, it's kind of a twofold solution to this, or not a solution. The thing is that on one side, the ICOs that are carried out in 2016 and in 2017 even, they were carried out because this was an easier way to get funding for great projects, for the projects that attracted a lot of investors, and it was a completely unregulated field. So there are some provisions, if you talk about the Slovenian law, that would demand from the ones that do an ICO to do their AML checks. It's kind of hard, but every ICO needs good advisors. Every ICO needs some money to burn through before the ICO is even launched. So yeah, it's one thing to consider and one thing to implement in the planning stages of the ICO.
Yes. So I think a big problem is, as we were discussing before this panel, when we are advising on the ICOs, people ask us which legislation, which country is the most suitable to do an ICO. And I think there is no easy answers, because a lot of ICOs are, you can say it, legislation shopping. They go for a one license in one country, doing AML in another country, because their legislation does not allow to do an ICO in just one country. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The problem here is if you're divided between each different EU member states, firstly it's difficult to even see what's your governing law. So if you do something in Slovenia, something in Germany, something in I don't know where, the problem is the governing law, because you do, in a legal sense, you're taking bits and pieces from each and every legislation there is. I think that's not a good idea, because firstly it costs a lot, and secondly you don't know if this is sufficient. So there is a need for a great legal environment here in the EU to enable ICOs to do everything in one member state, to be incorporated there, to get bank accounts there, and to do everything legally with the licenses, maybe if they're needed, or registrations, or stuff like that. So it's not good to be shopping between different legal environments. There should be an environment that would enable ICOs to do everything there. So yeah, that's my opinion. It's not good to be in different places at the same time.
Yes, but for now it's hard, because if you agree, the legislation is far behind the technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. What we're seeing now is that we had successful ICOs for quite some time now, and we still don't have a good legal environment, or let me say, good legislation that would cover this. So it is on the side of the authorities to provide a good environment somewhere in the EU. Be it, I don't know, Slovenia is kind of great in this field because they are moving forward a lot. And there are some other states like Estonia or Gibraltar, Malta, and other member states that, yeah, they are making their moves towards regulating this field. And the one that would be the first would make a great environment for ICOs, and I think that would attract many ICOs. But for now, yeah, it's a legal void, as I said before. So it's not good, because this is also stifling innovation a bit, because this is too unregulated, and that's not a good thing, because some of us are asking what's going to happen to the ICOs that are carried out now, that were carried out before, that will be carried out in 2018, sometime in the future. So it's not a good thing that everything is just like this Wild West here in the EU, or I would say in most countries in the world.
I agree. So Giga, can you tell me your insight on how the blockchain technology and also cryptocurrencies should be regulated, and what is coming next from the, I don't know, if, for example, the European Commission, or because I know there is no directives to expect soon, because legislation always, you know, takes some time.
Yeah, what we should be aware of is that basically ICOs are a new way of financing. So for me, I can easily compare that with the time where stock companies were firstly incorporated in the Netherlands, in the now Great Britain, and as we can see, and as Jan has already mentioned, I think we have some competing jurisdictions that want to solve this issue, and I think that the jurisdiction that will do its homework best will win in this field. And I think we're slowly moving towards ICOs becoming basically main or a way of financing, basically regulated and ordinary way of financing companies. And I think we'll see that in the future, in 5 or 10 years. For now, as we all mentioned, there's not a lot of regulation. I think it's good because we're at the start, and regulators, legislators should educate themselves. They should be careful with legislation that would stifle innovation. And I think sooner or later we will solve this issue.
Yes, I agree. So I think that the idea behind the blockchain is self-regulation and decentralization, but how can we make sure that the investors and the creditors can be secured properly? Do you think putting tokens as a security would prevent from some manipulation, in your opinion?
Firstly, when you consider regulation regarding the cryptocurrencies and ICOs, we should look this as a way of protecting the investors. All this regulation exists purely because the investors need to be protected by the persons who engage in ICOs, because there's the fear, there's the risk that these persons would commit fraud and took away their money which were gained during the ICOs and disappear. Therefore, the regulation is needed. And when we are discussing if the cryptocurrencies could or should be considered as financial instruments based on the current legislations, we need to be aware that in the European Union we have regulation which prevents or forbids the market abuse, the so-called market abuse regulation. This regulation also forbids these persons who are managing these funds to manipulate the market, to conduct to make basically to prevent them to make strategic moves on the market to influence the market behavior to detriment other investors and acquire certain benefits. And already on existing legislation, this means if we consider ICOs and tokens as financial instruments, therefore this means that investors are already protected by this regulation, and therefore everyone who, I mean the company which successfully conducted ICOs cannot act against this regulation without any legal consequences. And legal consequences for infringing those market abuse regulation provisions are substantial. I mean, there are criminal sanctions up to 3 to 5 years, and monetary penalty at least for in 15 million euros. And this is only for legal persons. Also for natural persons, there are fines up to 5 million euros. Also, it should be considered that all of the benefits should be reimbursed which were acquired through these illegal activities.
Yeah, so I think we're all familiar with some market manipulations going on with cryptocurrencies. I think you're all aware of the term pump and dump, where the big players are trying to, how do you say, increase the price of the crypto.
This is some form of manipulating the market. Players with a lot of power, I mean, they have a lot of power when they have a lot of assets. I mean, they can make false impressions that the price is rising, but their orders are fake. This is just one of the examples of market manipulation. And therefore, somebody pumps the price, and then the price virtually goes up and then dumps on the higher price. This is illegal on existing legislation if we consider all this as financial instruments. And basically, if you look them as they are basically the same.
Yes. Thank you for insight. As far as securities goes or anti-money laundering in ICOs, have you heard of an example that some countries or maybe the EU itself infringed some ICOs with penalties for being a security or not performing anti-money laundering? Janis or Giga?
There were cases in USA as far as I read in the newspapers, but I think what is important is that we should also be aware that tokens or cryptocurrencies are in some way different than stocks or financial instruments. So I think we should regard them, a lot of people are saying now that we should regard them as new asset class, and I think this is the way to go. We should be very cautious with informing investors, of course, but at the same time we should also prepare some other regulation or some other basis for basically legislating this field.
Yes, I agree. The cryptocurrencies are different than stocks and all these standard financial instruments, but we all agree that risks are the same, if not higher or more dangerous. Yeah. So therefore, it is necessary to regulate this,
yeah, exactly.
to prevent.
I completely agree with this, but for now, because under the MiFID or other or other laws that are here in the EU, mostly we cannot say that tokens are securities because they are not a regulated asset class. We have also other things of digital assets, so there are cryptocurrencies and there are utility tokens. As I said before, we should make a legislation that would make sense and that would not stifle the innovation. The thing is, to as I also said before, it should be principle-based, just to ensure some checks and balances that we do not directly support frauds, and we do not directly support like Ponzi schemes or other things. But as we are seeing now, because I have stocks, I have money in banks, so there's always somebody that's doing custodianship for me. But if you look at this in the let's say in the new world with digital assets, we are our own custodians mostly. So that's one thing that came from the institutions to ourselves. And if I go on from that, right now in the EU, since there's no regulation per se, and since I stand on a point that this regulation should not be, if sometime there will be a regulation, that it shouldn't be too harsh on the ICOs. There's also the legal proverb, the caveat emptor. So the due diligence is on the side of the one that's investing. So right now we are in such an environment that it'd be better to give wings or to enable ICO companies that are making ICOs to be free as much as possible, and to collect that money and to develop the blockchain or the distributed ledger technologies in a way that maybe we are on a, maybe the next step here is development in such sense that, like internet was developed. So, because this is a new technology, it brings a lot of benefits with it, and we still don't know what we can do with this technology. We have CryptoKitties now, that's some kind of a distributed app, but there's a lot of things that could be done on the blockchain or with the distributed ledger technology. So we must not make all these tokens or let's say digital assets, we must not make a legislation that would be too harsh on them. So what I think for now is, as Mario Draghi said, I think in October or in November, he still thinks that Bitcoin is too small of a player to be regulated in a way that well, we should just leave it as it is, make some regulations to stop the frauds, but then leave the field to develop on its own. Yeah, there are some tokens that are supposed to be securities, but until we have legislation that would cover it, or we cannot say that they are. And when we will be preparing the legislation, we must say that these tokens are a new asset class and regard them as that, and leave the technology to develop itself.
Yes, but you know, on the other side, the blockchain technology should be decentralized.
Yeah.
But we can see that some big mining companies are monopolizing, and they sort of show us the current of some big of decisions, whether there's going to be a fork of some kind of cryptocurrency, or how it's going to go in the future. And also, I think maybe we should consider to regulate this kind of monopolization. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, this is beyond all ICOs. So this is regulating the blockchain itself.
Yeah.
I think that right now we are thinking about ICOs, or thinking about the companies that have their products on blockchain. Regulating the blockchain itself, well, let's see. Let's give that time, because I cannot make an opinion right now what to do with. I see what you're asking. So these big miners, they are actually monopolizing their blockchain. So yeah, let's see where this will go. But I don't know. I really don't know an answer to that question. Let it be for the time being.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think we're out of time. Maybe there's time for one more question if someone wants to ask something. Yeah, maybe a quick question. Yeah.
Any questions? No, if you do have questions, one question there.
Oh, okay, just without the mic.
Yeah, just speak loud.
Where do you think would be in Europe the best country to set
And just quick answers from all of you.
Well, I think I'll have to charge you for that answer. So.
A typical answer from a lawyer. If you ask me, I don't know exactly.
Depends.
It depends is the
Yeah.
most common answer of the lawyer. But it's true, it depends. What are your issues? I mean, regarding issues on market abuse regulation, this is unified on all European Union. So therefore, there is basically no difference. But some countries in EU have their own field of autonomy, which they can regulate some fields by themselves. But market abuse is not one of those fields because it's too important to maintain internal market on European Union.
Yeah, so I think it also depends of what you want to do. If you want to make an exchange, then you need some different licenses, such as, I don't know, payment institution license. If you want to build products, there are different ways. If you want to evade taxes, you know, I don't know what is, you know, what I want to do. So I can't. I think we can't give you a unified answer, but it's a case-by-case basis question and answer. Also.
This is the problem, basically. There is a case-by-case analysis adopted in main countries, most countries.
Thank you so much.
One question.
We probably don't have time for that.
Very quick.
Ask your question and then literally 10-second answers.
What do you think will happen in Slovenia, and who will be writing the legislation in Slovenia? Your opinion, very briefly.
Rapid fire.
Talking to some authorities, I think they're just waiting for the European Commission to make their own answer. I don't think they want to go further from, and they're just waiting, you know. They're waiting for the European Union to make its first move.
Cool, that's all we have time for, but thank you guys so much.